the estimates that we were just looking at 2 months ago just look incredibly wrong at this stage.
Yeah.
So these are amazing numbers, right?
Yeah.
And I think a bunch of other interesting things start to happen here. One is, kind of munching in some stuff. One is their announcement on OpenClaw and not allowing that to be in the base plan. I think it kind of gets back to, they're in a massively interesting situation now. Their revenue's exploding. Despite the revenue explosion, they're still compute constrained. In other words, they could sell more if they had more. Right. And what do you do when you can sell more if you had more, but you can't make more? Right. You can't magically make data centers, though obviously they have that big announcement to do that. What you start doing is allocating capacity based on money. Right. And one of the first things they've figured out is these folks using these OpenClaw type agents are consuming vast amounts of tokens on fixed price plans. And they probably want to stop that, which is what they've done. So you're going to see them do exactly what anyone in economics would say do, which is try and find a way to maximize and extract even more revenue. And we saw it even with OpenAI last week, where you de-emphasize things like video, which consumes huge amounts of compute for small amounts of revenue. In Anthropic's case, obviously they have much less of that pure slop, but you de-emphasize things like OpenClaw Access, where it consumes a lot of your compute and doesn't make you a ton of money. And I think you're just going to see a continued trend to pricing tokens, pricing closer to the value, right? Not a huge trend because you want to get people, you don't want to overcompensate because you want to get people addicted on the product. Because the truth is, the thing you have in your favor with any digital good is the complete certainty that prices per token go down over time. But you do at least want to start allocating it a little more sensibly while you're constrained. So that's kind of, I think, the trend here.
We could talk a little bit about the OpenClaw stuff. Just but before we get there on the growth in Anthropic, the other interesting thing was the Wall Street Journal today had a bunch of leaks on the financials for Anthropic and OpenAI. And the one that jumped out at me when I contrast it with the fact that Anthropic has caught OpenAI, right, in half the time, is that their training costs are a quarter of OpenAI. Their training costs for models are a quarter of the OpenAI. Now, maybe that's because they're focused. They don't have to do video. They don't have to do images. They don't have to do a lot of consumer stuff. But if you just think about it for a moment, the compounding effects of catching OpenAI in half the time, right, at roughly the same revenue or more, 30 billion in 5 years, and having training costs that for now are a quarter of it, that's a double code red. It's one thing if you have two classic startups where one has bled money and it's artificial, there's other things. But if you have a dramatic cost benefit and you're out accelerating your competitors, and there's management team turmoil at your competitor, it really feels like the investors in OpenAI got a much worse deal in the last round than the Anthropic ones did. Just crazy. Just having both. You usually don't have both together with your competitor. You're out accelerating your competitor, and your training costs are a fraction of your competitor. Good God, that just compounds.
That's actually a good point, because take the Uber Lyft struggle, right? Uber had the, oh my God, we're out accelerating. Oh, but by God, we're spending every dollar we have to do it, and we show no fear, right? In this case, you're out accelerating the opposition while being more efficient on a bunch of interesting measures. No, you're right, Jason. That's a scary fact pattern. If you're running the game theory and you're the other guy, it's like, that's not good, right? They're growing faster than us. The gross margin economics are roughly the same / slightly better, and their costs below the line, and to a rounding error, costs are compute and scientists to run the compute for training are better. And that's a bad fact pattern.
Have we ever seen a bigger seeming chasm between where they're at? I mean, with the greatest of respects, it seems like Anthropic is accelerating faster than ever, and OpenAI is having more challenges than ever all at once.
I'll tell you the one I think about, the word where I didn't realize when we did this show the last, because the press is always focused on the headline stuff, right? Yeah, the OpenAI one was barely real.
Yeah, you said that.
Barely real. Andreessen's money appears to be real. It came in out front, right? Good. The 13, 14 billion, whatever they put in, that's real. 11 billion. All they have to do is get 20% carry and double that, and it's a nice side bet in an SPV, but. That was real. The SoftBank money comes in tranches. They have to borrow money to pay it. The Amazon money is tranched in part on IPO or AGI, right? And the NVIDIA money is almost all not money. It's almost all offsets in compute. So, I thought about it, but then in context of Anthropic's growth, like, I think OpenAI would have rather have all the cash. Like, it's not a sign of strength where the majority of the round is not cash up front. Like, I don't think that's a sign of strength. That's a sign of, like, classically, at least, barely getting the round done versus because why wouldn't you want all cash up front? Why wouldn't you want 140 billion up front?
A bit harsh on the barely, because I thought they tacked on another, I can't believe I said the sentence, they tacked on another 10 billion. Think about that sentence sometime, that I think was cold hard cash. So I think I agree. Your comment is correct, Jason. The vast bulk of the dollars weren't cash, but enough money changed hands that it represented a bona fide price at the time. But yeah, you are right. And again, I mean, look, Anthropic does some of the same stuff in the sense of, given that your biggest expenses are, compute and then distribution, from Microsoft on with OpenAI to all the recent Anthropic deals, there's a lot of this round tripping business. But in both, I'd say make two comments, perhaps. In both cases, there was enough hard dollars changed hands to represent, both of them represent price estimates. But to your point, based on what you know now, given the revenue equivalents, rough revenue equivalents, shouldn't assume until OpenAI releases their numbers, maybe they've exploded too, but definitely Anthropic at 370 billion feels a little more comfortable, let's just say, than OpenAI at 820 or 840 or whatever the final closing was, right?
Well, OpenAI did say 2 billion last month. I think that's why Anthropic rushed out the 30.
Right.
That they're at a $2 billion run rate.
And look, we have the whole gross and net thing, but the bottom line is this: when you look at those two graphs, you definitely don't say to yourself, I think if this was a public stock, let me put it this way: if both of these companies were public, there would be a bunch of those, New York hedge funds shorting OpenAI, longing Anthropic, and saying they have the perfect AI bet, right? Would you short OpenAI at 870 and go long Anthropic at 372? I'm not a risky guy, but even I would contemplate doing that. It feels like a no-brainer bet. You have roughly the same revenue, a better trajectory, and a management team for half the price. And if you short the one and long the other, you're diversifying away the AI overall risk, and you're just making a relative performance bet. That's probably, that would be an interesting one.
What would you say to an OpenAI employee who is now looking at their incredible stock price appreciation with tens of millions of dollars in equity that they now have at the 820 price? Sell it all at 820 the minute a tender comes. What would you say to them?
I think I wouldn't pile on. In general, look, and I have some things in OpenAI I want to pile on this time. And if you recollect, in the last couple of weeks, I've tried to avoid the pile on when someone's down. I think you always want to be more tempered. But I always say to everyone in any private in any private company, I say when the liquidity window opens, take it seriously, because it mightn't open again for a while, right? So when the liquidity window opens at $0.8 trillion, the alert reader should say, if you're planning to buy that house in San Francisco, you might need an extra few million just based on what I'm seeing in the market now in terms of house prices. So take advantage of this thing, because all your brethren have, right? I wouldn't, as I say, I think the people I don't want to pile on the individual employee. Remember, the company's still doing a lot of great stuff. You got a lot of turmoil. We got a lot of drama at the top. We'll talk about that. But, I think you take advantage of liquidity just because you should always take some advantage of liquidity.
Let's knock it on the head. Let's talk about the drama at the top. Talk about a management team turnover. You have Brad, the COO, who's been moved to special projects.
My dream job.
Sign being moved to special projects.
I'm going to be the SVP of special projects for 20VC in my next phase of life.
Jason, I would love you to be the SVP of special projects.
Just special projects. Just special projects.
We have the CMO stepping down due to health reasons. We have the CRO out. We have Fiji, who is head of apps, taking a short leave of absence with health problems. How do we read this very significant multitude of changes at the management layer?
If we step back a minute, it ties to Anthropic passing them. You don't just sit there and make no changes on the team when your competitor over the last 6 months has radically changed the competitive posture. So Look, I don't think any of us like that amount of change in any management team, right? It feels almost a wholesale change at some level, but and it's risky. But you gotta, calling code red 3 months ago didn't magically change the trajectory here. So it ties. You got to try to mix things up in some fashion. Hopefully, you can do it with the team you have, but in the context of Anthropic now out accelerating OpenAI, it just makes sense to reboot the team. It just makes sense.
Yeah, there's some rebooting, some. I mean, to use your phrase, the reboot. I mean, who's been hired? What's the additive reboot?
Well, the dramatic one, which is always risky for like any startup, is you take Denise Dresser, who was CEO of Slack, who came from Salesforce just a couple months ago, and you put her in charge of basically everything go-to-market and related, right? That's a good bet on a seasoned executive, but that's the type of change that we've all seen as investors is like super risky, right? You bring in the person with the perfect LinkedIn, right, and the perfect background that's still getting to know the product. They're still on a get to know you tour. They haven't quite been to the New York office yet. They're getting to know the product, and all of a sudden you give them this massive portfolio because they're proven executive. In my experience, I don't know what you guys think. In my experience, that has about a 30% chance of success, just roughly. That bringing in the perfect LinkedIn, giving them a massive portfolio, and either attaching to something in tumult. If it's executing to perfection, it always seems to work. Bringing in Mr. LinkedIn, but when you're in tumult, there's not a lot of time to learn everything, right? There's not a lot of time for the get to know you tour. So it's just risky, but it's a play. Like it is a play.
I get where you're going there, Rory, which is like, for the replacements to be additive, there needs to be great talent added. And there seems to be a lack of people coming on the field when they're coming on.
Agreed. And, I'm all, as I say, I have a couple of comments. One is I'm always loath to comment on, because the illness related is, because you just don't know what's going on in people's lives. And that's tough. And people have challenges. And, you wish people all the best, especially in these kind of chronic diseases, and hope they can get back to full health. Right. Let's just start with that, because that sucks. Right. At the same time, you have a lot going on here. Right. You have a lot going on. And, to me, even all these people change. I'm tempted to make the famous Oscar Wilde quote in The Importance of Being Earnest. To lose one parent might be an accident. When he was talking to this woman was talking to the orphan, but to lose both parents smacks of carelessness, right? Well, you are getting to the stage of carelessness here, right? But I actually don't think that's the real issue. It's fun to say. I think I'll tell you, we haven't mentioned the two most surprising things in the last week on OpenAI. One is, I'm just going to say it, I thought the acquisition of a TPBN was just insane. Not on its, on the, in the particular, it doesn't matter. But you don't launch an code red edict and a focus edict and no more side projects edict, and then within the space of a week, do something that's so obviously a side project. To me, no matter what you get, I mean, we can discuss whether it's stupid on its face and whether, buying media assets is the way to go. And I acknowledge the Andreessen articulated thesis that, you have to control the media story, though doesn't seem to be Anthropic has any need to do that. But stepping back one level, you're running a $25 billion company, the most exciting company on the planet. If the number, and you just told your entire internal team that you need to focus, and then there's nothing that's more of a vanity project than buying a media company, right? I mean, look,
Just one thing, we could talk about it more or less. The one thing just to add, when you look at the press, this is interesting. That deal, the outreach was in January. That's a lot of time in OpenAI and AI time, right? Vigi was new. Thought this would be a great thing to elevate OpenAI in January. Now it's April, and maybe the deal seems a lot different, but in January it was a different world, right?
Well, at some point, I remember. Yes,
I don't think it didn't happen last week is my only point. It happened in January. It took some time to close, right? And I will say one thing, I'm 90% sure it wouldn't happen today, to your point. If nothing else, priorities change, right? It probably wouldn't happen today.
If you only noticed in the last week, that you need to focus, then yes, I'll give you that, right? But you didn't just notice in the last week you need to focus, right? And if you did, maybe you need to focus. See Prior comment, right? If you haven't realized you're in code red for the last 2 or 3 months, and if you haven't realized this is the kind of thing you don't do when you're in code red, then you're just not paying attention. So I challenge that. I think it's a vanity project and absurd. And then the
Wow.
other